Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond the Finish Line, where I am going to be interviewing former elite athletes who are now super impressive in their careers and their lives. They've basically taken principles that they've learned through competing at the highest levels of their sports and taken them into other domains. My first guest is Maya Dirado. Maya won 2 Olympic gold medals and a couple of other medals as well. She got an engineering degree from Stanford and an MBA from Stanford. She went on to work at McKinsey and is now working on the fundraising team at one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious venture capital firms, General Catalyst. On top of that, she's the mother of 2 little kids. How does she do it all? Let's find out in this first episode of Beyond the Finish Line. I hope you enjoy the show. Please follow the show. Please subscribe. You can go to the website of the show, beyondthefishlinepod.com, to learn more. Let's jump in. So, Maya Dirado. Oh, I'll start over. It's Maya Andrews.
You can do, it doesn't matter.
Maya Dirado Andrews. Thank you so much for the time and so excited to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Dave.
And the obvious place to start would be at the beginning of your journey. And I do want to start there, but I want to give listeners a good idea of what the theme is going to be through our discussion and throughout the entire show, which is, what does success look like? And I'm sure that you have a great perspective on this, given that you've achieved so many admirable milestones throughout your life so far, and you're still so young, 30, 31. And I thought I'd just start there. So with where you're at in life right now, what does success look like?
So my favorite definition of success that I've come across is from John Wooden, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but it's basically like success is the peace of mind that comes from knowing you got as close to your full potential as possible, basically. And so there's nothing external in the definition, and it's not even like the rush of victory or an achievement. It's like the peace of mind that you get and the satisfaction. And so that's really resonated with how I've kind of felt most fulfilled when I've had, breakthroughs or achievements throughout my career so far and life in general, I guess. And it really comes down to just, working within your given abilities. How close are you getting to kind of maximizing your potential? And that looks a lot different now than it did when I was swimming, but it's still, I think, relevant. Just kind of having the grace with yourself as you move into new roles, whether that be in work or like parenthood or as a spouse, to think about, what am I capable of? What do I want to be? And how close am I getting to that kind of ultimate ideal, basically? And I think you get a lot of satisfaction from thinking about life that way, as opposed to hitting specific milestones. And like as swimmers, as collegiate athletes, as, pretty type A achievers, I think it's really common and understandable to want to hit, kind of specific goals that maybe other people have laid out or set, or things that are expected of you generally in the world. But in my experience, those do not bring nearly as much satisfaction in the long term as when you know that you've done your best, kind of regardless of what the external validation is.
Okay. So you touched on like 7 different questions that I wanted to ask. And
Sorry.
It sounds like you don't necessarily set these milestones or maybe an objective like, I'm going to win this thing and I will be successful if I win that thing. But instead, it's you kind of visualize, or you wrap your head around what your potential is or what you think it is. And you're just working towards that to the ideal feeling that you are being successful.
Yeah, it's really a balance, because as I think you would agree, having those clear milestones and goals that are cut and dry, that are external are really helpful. It's
Mhm.
really powerful to be able to say, I want to win NCAAs or I want to get my Olympic trials cut. And so I don't think those are necessarily bad. But the way I view it is that you have to kind of earn the right to make those big things your goals. Like it's one thing to just have an ultimate ambition of going to the Olympics. It was another thing for me to be able to seriously sit down. And it was really only like a year and a half before 2016 where I felt, okay, truly, I have earned the right to make this a serious goal for myself. And it's achievable, but it's still challenging. And it's kind of had, checked all. People have to be very careful of using those external markers as their goals and really being honest with themselves of like, have I done enough to put myself in the position where that is, saying I want to win this thing is, checks all the boxes of smart goal making. And so it's a bit of a balance of seeing like, where am I at based on my journey? What are things that I can work for that are going to be really helpful and motivating, and kind of blending those two together to get to the right kind of set of goals to shoot for.
Yeah, so it's almost like there's this wide net that you're casting that you kind of need to commit to. Let's say, like, I want to get better at swimming or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to prove to yourself that you can drive the level of commitment that you need in order to be able to set that goal of, I think I can go to the Olympics, or I think I can win the Olympics.
Yeah. And there's no shame of setting a goal of, I want to make regionals or sectionals or something smaller, and that's going to get you through that year and get you the progress that you need to make. And so, people just need to be really personal and thoughtful about the goals that they set.
I love it. Okay, now we can jump into the beginning of the journey.
Okay.
That was a beautiful answer, by the way. Thank you. Going all the way back to the beginning, what inspired your interest in swimming in the first place? I know you grew up in California, and what motivated you to stay with it for so long? I could imagine after that answer that it was, I think that I can do better, but I'd love to hear how you stayed with it for so long.
Yeah, I think what originally gets you in the sport and what inspires you to stick with it are generally two very different things. I started as a 6-year-old for full-time swimming. My mom swam growing up, and one of our really good family friends in Santa Rosa was the junior college swim coach. I had started as a synchronized swimmer at age 5 and had a really good feel for the water, but there's obviously all sorts of weirdness. It's kind of like the dance moms of the water. And so they were like, maybe you should try, competitive swimming. And so I joined our local swim team and I was good. I don't think I necessarily loved it immediately. But it was a combination of kind of sticking with it, having it be one thing among many. Like I was still playing soccer at that point, having multiple activities to go to and just work on. And, honestly, like, as a young kid, being naturally good at something is pretty fun. And so I think that's what kept me in it initially. And then, it was just really addicting, as I think a lot of people find with like metric based sports, to get better every year and see the time that you were dropping and make the next meet and get to the next level. And there's always, swimming is so great in that there's always the next meet or time standard to shoot for. And so I just got really into trying to drop time and like everything that went along with that. And it was very clear that I did not have athletic talent outside of the water. So it made the decision very easy to focus on swimming from an early age.
Tough for a fish to run around and kick a soccer ball, huh?
Yeah.
Cool. So you then went to Stanford. This addiction brought you to Stanford, the addiction to drop time, and probably the same thing in the classroom. But how did you manage the balance between high-level swimming at the performance level that you were performing at and your academic responsibilities? Because, studying at Stanford is no small feat.
It is no small feat. There were some hiccups at the beginning as you're kind of trying to figure out, okay, what does it mean to be in a college class now? And I think honestly, that was those hiccups were caused less by like any distraction that practice caused and more of just, how do you go from being top of your class in high school to now being among the smartest kids in the country? And it's just different. And it takes a little bit of time to figure out, how do I study? How do I manage my own time now that I have like breaks during the day and I can either nap or watch TV or study and try to go to office hours and meet with a TA. And so there was a little bit of, some figuring out of that in freshman year, fall quarter. But overall, I think a lot of the habits that you develop as a high schooler and being, really dedicated to your sport and academics really translate well when you get to college. Still, I think my AP Chem class in high school was harder than Chem 31 A and B in Stanford. And so, there was just things where you're like, oh, I can do this. And, having those little wins is a confidence builder. But it is certainly a transition. And I think it's a really great opportunity for kids to learn how to manage your own life and ask for help and recognize that it's not all going to be spoon fed to you. And that's actually what I really appreciate about Stanford's program, is that you're treated as a student that also happens to do your sport at a very high level. And so you're not forced to go to tutoring. You're not forced to sit in study hall with all your friends. Like, you're treated as an adult and given a lot of freedom to figure out how to manage your life. And I think that's a really great lesson for any 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old to learn.
Yeah. Given that freedom, what did good look like for you in college? I'm assuming in the pool, it was probably dropping time. But what about the balance and what about the classroom?
Yeah, I am pleased to say that now after graduate school, nobody really needs to ask for my undergrad GPA because it was fine, but it wasn't outstanding. And it was really a process for me to figure out what I wanted to study and what was right for me. And that was a really long journey. So I didn't actually decide on my major until I switched majors junior year. I was symbolic systems and then quickly realized, nope. That's not for me. But all of the classes that I did like within symbolic systems were MS&E, which I ultimately ended up majoring in. And so
and that's management science and engineering for non-Stanford folks.
If anybody listening to this podcast did not go to Stanford. So yeah, it was a little bit of trial and error and just trying to work on making that transition from being obsessed with my grades to making sure that I was learning and pursuing things that I was interested in, and just kind of owning my academics a little bit more. And it was certainly a process, but I'm really pleased with where I ended up. But yeah, certainly new standards were set from high school to college.
So it was a learning process of, okay, maybe I can't be perfect across the board at everything. So I need to, learn or find what resonates. Back to that John Wooden quote.
Yeah. And I think also learning how to kind of bounce back. I think a lot of high achieving high schoolers that end up going to Stanford it's come very easily to them. Like they've loved school, they've coasted through it. And that was certainly the case for me. And then I got to Stanford and I took, the Math 42 series, which is kind of, beyond calculus AB. And I just really struggled with it. Like, it was totally proof-based. I had never done anything like that before. And so I kind of made the decision like, oh, math isn't for me at Stanford. I was good at math in high school, but this is a different level. And this just isn't, I got to find something else. And then I ended up going, back into math for MS&E, took Math 51, which is linear algebra. And I loved it and I crushed it. And I just learned that I had to learn how to learn in a different way. And I made too many kind of sweeping statements of, I can't do math at Stanford, instead of just being like, how do I figure out what I need to do? What is the office hour cadence I need to go to? And being okay if things didn't come super naturally to me for the first time.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And your Stanford career almost perfectly went straight into your Olympic career. So you went from school, I think you did one extra year or was it 2 extra years?
I had
Of,
one
or you
extra quarter
co-termed?
of school.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you went to the Olympics in the meantime and won 2 gold medals, a silver and a bronze. I wanted to spend a minute talking about that. Not many people have won an Olympic medal, let alone a gold medal, let alone two, and then a silver and a bronze on top of that. I was actually like going and looking at some stats, and it looked like your performance at the Olympics was it might have been better from a medal count than your NCAA performance, maybe freshman, sophomore, junior year, which I thought was pretty funny. So top of the world from, very good NCAA performance. But talk to me about winning that gold medal. It was the 200 backstroke. I just watched it. It was incredible. Strongly recommend anyone go and watch it. But what went through your head during that race? And then when you touched the wall, what was the flurry of emotions, or what went through your head?
Yeah, I think to give that context, it kind of we have to go back through the full week because that was my last race of the meet and also of my swimming career. But it goes back to my earlier point that you have to kind of earn your way into setting those goals. And so after trials, which was the most stressful thing I've ever done, and I think the day that I made the team in the 400 IM was one of the worst days of my life, in that if I had to go back and relive a day, that is the lowest on my list to have to experience, because it was just horribly stressful. So then by the time trials is done and I realize I've made the team, like the Olympics feels like pure upside. And so there felt like very little pressure on there. So my goal there was to medal in all of my events. And I didn't think, I knew that being on the relay was a possibility, but I didn't actually qualify for the 200 free. I didn't swim that at trials. So I thought kind of best case scenario, I would get to be on the prelim of the 4x200 freestyle relay if they needed to rest somebody. So that was sort of where like, okay, I earned the right. I saw where I was in the world. It is a realistic goal to think that I can podium in all three of my individual events. And then we get to the meet and, it starts off and it's going great. I silver and get a best time in the 400 IM. And then I get a bronze and a best time in the 200 IM, like just feeling really good and feeling very free in how I was able to swim. And then partly because of that, I got the nod for the finals team of the relay, which was probably the most stressful race that I had to do at the Olympics. Just like, the pressure of, being responsible for bringing home a medal for your country, and the relay start. Luckily, it's the 4x2, so I was not expected to have any sort of quick reaction time. And also, it's really great to have Katie Ledecky going after you and knowing like you really just have to stay close and then she'll take care of it. Yeah, big safety net. So, but that was an incredible experience. And then, through that, I got a gold medal. So at this point, I have a silver, a bronze, and a gold. I've exceeded kind of every expectation that I had for myself at this meet. I have one final race, which I've never even, very much, as my dad used to say, like I was playing with house money. There was just no pressure on me whatsoever, or at least I didn't feel any. And so going into that race, it was this really weird balance of trying to treat it as any other race, getting to the end of a really good meet and feeling tired but happy. And, those feelings where you're just like, everything's clicking. And it was for the entire team, which was why it was such a great experience. But it just really felt like we couldn't miss. And so trying to just ride that energy, coupled with really trying to soak in the moment and recognize this is my last race at the Olympics. This is my last race ever in my swimming career. And so trying to soak it all in while at the same time not letting that overwhelm the moment or make it, more intense than it needed to be. But it progressed really well. Prelims to semis, just, kind of would get good, better, best as you go through prelims to semis to finals. And that last night, I remember, having a fine, normal warm up. And I remember saying bye to Greg in the warm up area. And then I really blacked out. Like I don't remember anything until I flipped at the one of the race. So I was, 3/4 of the way through. And I remember thinking when I flipped, oh, I'm closer to Katinka than I thought I would be. Like I'm closer than I'd been in any of my other races that week. Little did I know, and only after watching the replay, I got way farther behind off the turn, but I didn't know that. And so the last thing I saw was like, okay, I'm kind of in it. That last 50, I had a few thoughts go through my mind. One, I heard the crowd getting louder. And so I thought, she's either going to break the world record or I'm catching up. And I decided to just assume the latter because that helped me in that situation. And I also thought she's had more races than me this week. So like I'm fresher. And then I also thought this is the hardest my legs ever have to work for the rest of their life. Like this is it. And, I saw the flags and did my finish and threw my hand back and looked up, and it just, could not believe it. It was just too good to be true.
So you were fully blacked out still at this moment, but you were just like, whoa, what just happened kind of thing?
Yeah. I mean, like looked up and heard the roar and, had to double check that it was true, but yeah, it was perfect.
That's awesome. And kind of switching gears or talking about that transition out, you knew going into the Rio Olympics that was going to be your last race. You knew in that last 50, that was going to be the hardest your legs would ever have to work. How did you know that? And it sounds like you kind of had some goals for some wide net that you wanted to cast outside of swimming. Talk to me about how that came about. Did it come about earlier in your life or when you were in college?
Yeah, I was a bit maybe unique in that I had to be kind of convinced to actually try to make the Olympic team. I was really scared of being a swimmer or an athlete that was hanging on for too long. And that was totally kind of something internal that I had to deal with. But I'd seen swimmers that, were still swimming. I was like, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Like, you can't just swim forever. And I really did not want to be that person. And so, luckily I had great coaches and family and Rob that, told me, okay, I was 21, 22 at that point. They're like, you're very young. Like 2 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of things. This is going to be an amazing experience. Nobody is thinking that. You'll, just try it. Like you'll regret it if you don't. And so finally I got convinced to be like, okay, I can go for this period of time and then I'll end and then I'll do something else. And what also really helped throughout all this is that I got an offer for a consulting role in the fall of 2014 that was supposed to start in the fall of 2015. And I was thinking like, okay, great. I'll swim at Pan Pacs that summer and then I'll be done. And then Pan Pacs went well. And so I made the world's team and, the firm said, it's totally fine if you want to defer. That is not a problem. Go train for the Olympics. And so I was able to push that back. But having like a clear next thing, I feel so grateful for because it really took a lot of the pressure off of trials going in there in 2016 and knowing, this is it. If it goes well, great. I'll go to the Olympics and then be done. If it doesn't, I'll take a couple of months and then still I have a new phase of life and a new challenge ahead of me. And so, I think that was actually a really critical part of my success that year was knowing that all of the things that I did were the last time I had to or got to do it. And so that either made me, it made them less unbearable, like a Colorado Springs trip over, the day after Christmas flying to the Springs being like, well, this is the last time I ever have to do it. And then it also made me really appreciate kind of the sweet moments that we get of knowing like, this is the last time. And so I feel like I was just really, I was in a really good headspace that year, knowing that whatever happened, I was going to move on to a new challenge after swimming.
And that new challenge is the firm McKinsey, which is one of the big three consulting firms. It's an extremely difficult job to get. It's very badass. And you also got into the Stanford Graduate School of Business right after, or I guess while you were at McKinsey.
It was a bit delayed. So McKinsey was through 20, and then in 20, I ended up applying to the GSB.
Okay, got it. But when you went back to McKinsey and you were starting to work in business almost immediately, what was this new wide net that you were casting? What were you looking for in terms of like resonating? When people go into business, it's like, oh, is it to make money or is it to be mission oriented and save the world? How are you thinking about how do I find what good looks like now that it's not winning a gold medal at the Olympics?
It was really hard, and there was no clear answer. And I would say, if you talk to people from my time there, I was not, the most stellar BA business analyst they've ever encountered. I really just wanted to learn. I wanted to get exposure to a lot of things. I knew there were a lot of known unknowns for me. Like I knew that there were so many things that I had never experienced because my whole life outside of school had been swimming up to that point. I never had internships. I never had a job. And so I just wanted a place where people would take time to teach me and where I would get exposure to a lot of things because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so in that respect, McKinsey was an amazing place to be able to land after wrapping up my swimming career. But there, to be honest, like I probably struggled for a bit with setting clear goals, and I just worked on how do I do the best I can in the job in front of me and where I'm at right then. And I think it kind of again goes back to like having the privilege to set really specific goals, I think only comes when you have a little bit of experience under your belt. And so I would try to improve. I would try to, learn new skills, but I didn't have like, I'm going to make partner in 5 years. That wasn't my immediate goal because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I didn't know if this was the place that I wanted to be at for the long term. So I kind of just gave myself a lot of time to figure things out and kind of get my legs under me. And the way I thought about it was like, it's not like I'm a gold medalist now BA. It's like, I'm a 6-year-old again. Like that was when I started swimming, that was my level of experience. That's what I knew. And so that was kind of the mentality that I took with me to McKinsey was I'm starting out. I've never done this before. I'm just here to learn and try to get better. And then I'll figure out kind of what those next things are.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to touch on was goal setting outside of these sports. It's been very difficult for me because it was so easy, I guess. And the contrast is, you don't have those time goals or the self-improvement metrics to even know, am I getting better? But I guess the question for you now is, given what you know now, you're now at General Catalyst, one of the top venture capital firms. Mm-hmm. You went to the Stanford GSB and you were that 6-year-old business analyst at McKinsey. What would you tell that 6-year-old business analyst at McKinsey in terms of, taking your time or setting some level of a goal? How should you think about goals now that you're not in a clearly defined arena?
Yeah, I think that is something that doesn't get discussed enough with athletes that make the transition. Is one of the things that you're always either taught to say or people say to you or like, oh, athletes, how to work hard and set goals and get better. But I think it's not talked enough about how different of an environment it is to be in kind of the quote unquote real world, have a job. Nothing is as clear cut as a stopwatch is going to be. And it's hard to kind of get used to, or it's certainly a transition. And I think assuming that all of the work ethic that you had in the pool is going to really cleanly translate into whatever you do next is not necessarily true. It takes a lot of time and effort to figure out, to your point of like, how do I set goals in this new environment? Like nobody's telling me, okay, you need to, David, your next goal is to qualify for Olympic trials. And then it's to get a second swim. And then it's to make finals. And then it's to get top 2. Like,
oh, okay.
You're like, okay, great. I'll do it. I'll put my head down and work as hard as I can. And I think a lot of athletes, when they get to the real world, they crave just somebody tell me what to do, and nobody's going to do that for you. And so, honestly, like, I'm so glad I went to the GSB and it was so helpful in my career, but I'm perfectly open to saying, like, business school is kind of the last check the box, like, resume exercise that you can do. And for a lot of type A people, you're like, somebody tell me what I need to get. And it's an MBA in a lot of cases. So you're like, okay, I'll go do that. And then after that, you're like, okay, now what? Now there's nothing out there ahead of me that somebody needs to tell me I should do. And it's really up to you to decide that. And so I think the advice that I would give to a 6-year-old BA, if we're going to go with that metaphor, is like, that is the reality. And you need to spend a lot of time and effort into talking with people that you respect and hearing different ways that they've navigated their careers and found motivation and found ways to improve. So, like, being kind of telling them this is not how the world is different than the pool or the track or, whatever your sport environment was. You need to work really hard at being comfortable in this new arena and figuring out how it works and talking to people that you respect. And it's going to feel awkward, and there's going to be some not so great conversations or maybe things that didn't resonate, but you are going to find people that have really helpful advice, and you just have to figure out how to get that from them. But just really making them aware that it's going to be messier and it's going to be unsatisfactory for a while, and you have to kind of just sit in that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So now that you're a couple years or a handful of years into kicking ass in your career, what tools and principles do you use to drive your performance at work now? And what of those were previously skills or tools that you used while you were swimming? Is there a lot of overlap there?
There's certainly some overlap. And I think part of the art is figuring out what translates really well and what are areas that are a little bit foreign and that I have to get better at. And I think one of those is what we just talked about, of nobody's going to tell me explicitly what to do. I'm not going to go in and get a set every day that I need to complete. It's a lot of creativity and figuring out on my own kind of what needs to be done. So just, a lot more ownership over what I'm doing. But what does translate is self-awareness and being really honest about where your strengths and gaps are. The ability to work with and for teammates and recognizing just how important, your colleagues or your teammates were in the journey to get to kind of being the best that you can be and drawing the best performance out of yourself. And I think college athletes would tell you that it's so fun because it's all about the team in a way that it generally hasn't been before. And similarly, in my current job, I found that the people that I work with are so phenomenal, and that's made all the difference in my enjoyment and learning and satisfaction and growth. And so it's very natural. That's a very natural thing that translates, is just learning how to work as a team and kind of put your own ego aside. And then just the ability to kind of look long term and think back to, okay, I started as a 6-year-old swimmer. This was how good I was. I ended 17 years later at this level. This is the progress that can be made in 17 years. And, 17 years is a short career. Like that would be well before the age of retirement. And so just being really intentional about thinking, if you have intentional practice, whatever that looks like in your job, and you are as focused on improvement as you were in your sport, you can make so much progress in that period of time. And so just trying to figure out ways that you can create those learning and growth opportunities in a job, and thinking really long term, even if there's, a few things that you miss right now. It's like, okay, well, this is my second year doing it. Like, I'm going to give myself grace, but also have the expectation of myself that I will get better and I will kind of get to the level that I want to be.
There's been a lot of debate, or I guess there's just a common kind of question that comes up when thinking about career development, advancement, and that's, do I round out my weaknesses or focus on my strengths? What's your take on which one of those to focus on? And is that even the right way to think about it? In swimming, it's like, you have a stroke or an event and you focus very, very narrowly on that.
Yeah. It's hard. I think the difference is that when you're swimming, it's entirely on you. So like my weakness was breaststroke. I had to do the breaststroke leg. I couldn't tap somebody else in for that as much as I wish I could. Whereas in a job, there's obviously things that you have to be good at and get better at. But I think the beauty of it is you either have colleagues that really excel in other areas and you can kind of leverage them and know that maybe I'm not as strong at this, but this person really crushes it. And so let's figure out a way to work together and bring the best that, the company has to offer. Or if you get into a managerial position, being really open about your weaknesses and being like, I'm going to hire the best person I can find in this area to complement me. And so I think you have a little bit more flexibility in the working world to kind of bring in other really talented people to round out your weaknesses. I would still say that, depending on what they are, you want to raise them up to a certain level, right? Like you don't want a glaring issue as or like a liability, but I think it's a lot more fun, certainly, to be able to just really get really good at some certain skills, but making sure that you have the self-awareness to know, like, these are my gaps and I'm okay at them, but I'm never going to be an A+ player at these things. So I'm going to really prioritize making sure that there are people around me that can do that.
Gotcha. And for people who aren't necessarily in those managerial positions quite yet, I would assume it's really just the self-awareness and working with a manager to say, hey, what do we work on here that helps the team best? Kind of back to that previous point.
Totally. And figuring out a way like, okay, obviously I have to be at a certain base level across any number of key skills that you need to do your job. So you gotta get kind of that level, but then don't beat yourself up if something isn't going to come as naturally to you. It's a good learning experience. It's good to get uncomfortable and kind of figure out, how do I learn here? I think that's just good practice for anybody to be, kind of thrown outside of their comfort zone a little bit. But I think it's probably a little bit more, to your point, like how do we figure out what's best for the team and where I can best contribute, and not, bang your head against a wall trying to get 20% better at something that's not going to, it's going to take you way too long for that to even pay off, if that makes sense.
It's an interesting point as well. When you think about ants and how they all live in this colony and they need to go and do something, they work as a team. They have like one mind to do it. And something that at least I, as a swimmer in this individual sport, didn't recognize as much when I was swimming was how thinking that bigger picture and thinking about the team is actually the most important part of business, because you can't just go and be a one-man team or a one-woman team. You need to have those support roles. So I think that's really, really cool advice. Now, switching gears a tad bit more, something that people have been talking a lot about in the last couple of years has been mental health in these high pressure environments. And I'm curious to hear, given, I saw you in college as someone who seemed to be the most calm, cool, and collected person around campus while achieving greatness. How have you managed your mental well-being throughout your career transitions and, from college all the way to where you are now?
Yeah. Thank you. That's very kind. There were certainly some breakdowns. And I think when I struggled most was when I did not have a clear reason for why I was doing something. And so for me, the hardest transition came from college to pro, and just really figuring out, okay, now why am I doing this? Before, I was doing it for the team. I had always wanted to swim for Stanford. That was enough to score points for the team. Now what's my reason? Like, why am I killing myself every day at practice? And so that took a while. It took a few months to get back to like, okay, I care about this for this reason. I can kind of get back to deriving enjoyment from my own self-improvement. It took some hard conversations with my coach, who sat me down and said, like, you are better than this. And if you care, if you want to commit to this, like, let's do it. If not, let's move on, and no hard feelings. But I think kind of that approach of having somebody that knew me really well and had high expectations for me was really beneficial. In terms of overall mental health, I think where a lot of people get wrapped around the axle is just making swimming or whatever your sport is the thing. And that's what your identity is based on. And that's a really stressful way to live, because everybody will get betrayed by their sport at some point. And you'll have an injury, you'll have an off year, you'll just lose motivation for some months on end. And that happens to everybody if you do it long enough. And so to think that who you are or why you matter is tied to your performance in a specific skill, I think is really a tough place to be. And so for me, it was always, I have an identity that is totally outside of swimming. I have relationships that are completely outside of swimming and not based on that, or at least the relationships, even when I do have relationships within swimming, I know that it's on a deeper level than just my skills as a swimmer. They care about me as a human being and want me to succeed long term. And I think an easy way to think about it is like, swimming was always a verb for me and not a noun in terms of my identity. Like, swimming was an activity. It was something that I did. It was not, I am a swimmer. And so when I stopped swimming, that wasn't like the ground falling out from under me. Or when I was swimming and things weren't going well, it wasn't earth shattering. It was like, okay, this is a part of my life that maybe isn't going great right now, but I have great relationships. I have other things that I'm interested in, other ways that I'm growing. And I think that was how I managed it relatively well. But, it's hard. It's high pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just a truth that must be accepted in a way, but making sure you're rounded out and you have that balance sounds like kind of the key to success there. It's not putting all your eggs in one basket. And I feel that in career or post athletics life, you need to do the same thing. And I know that you have a family that you're working on building right now. You have Rob, who you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm a buddy of Rob's for anyone else listening. And I'm curious to know how you think about prioritization, given all of these, incredible responsibilities that you have on your plate.
Yeah, it's, again, like things are gonna ebb and flow. It's never gonna be perfect all the time, but knowing that my family, everything kind of comes from that core, and it really doesn't matter how well work is going if things are stressful at home with Rob or something's not right with Charlie, like nothing else matters. And so just recognizing that and knowing very clearly where things are ordered kind of fundamentally is critical. And then from there, obviously there will be times at work where it's stressful, it's busy. I really like my job and it matters a lot to me to do it and be good at it. And I get a lot of fulfillment out of it. But at the end of the day, if Charlie's sick, if he's struggling, if Rob is stressed, like you just kind of have to figure out a way to make sure that is right before anything else. And so I think it's recognizing that you're not always going to get it right all the time. There's going to be times where I feel like I'm not seeing my family enough, but knowing that there's light at the end of the tunnel or that it's a temporary thing. And then being around people that also have those values is really critical at work, and making sure that, they understand and they're like, go do whatever you have to do, I think makes things a lot easier. So surrounding yourself with people that have similar values in those situations is really helpful. I think you can still do it if you set really strong boundaries, but it's certainly better when you have people around you that are making similar decisions, or at least very encouraging of you to be able to make those decisions. But it's kind of, it's almost nice in a way when you have kids, because at least for me, it was such a clear shift of, you don't even have to think about it. And you're like, oh, my
Yeah.
world is revolving around this little person now. And that makes all the decision making very easy from this point. So it's been great so far.
Awesome. Okay. So have kids and have a family and your prioritization mental model becomes clear. Is that the answer?
I mean, I would make sure you do the work ahead of time, but it certainly helps clarify things.
Okay, the last question I have for you before we jump into a quick 3-minute fun exercise is, are there any life lessons that you learned from your swimming career that have been unexpectedly valuable to you in your life and your business career so far?
I don't know if it's unexpected value, because like once you learn this lesson, I think it's pretty clear how it applies to every aspect of life. But one of the things that I took away from swimming is that basically all aspects of yourself are, not immutable. Like things that I think people think are innate traits, that, oh, Olympians are born with a work ethic or courage or calm. Like, at least in my case, I changed a lot as a swimmer from high school to college to pro. And I got so much tougher mentally and physically. I got so much better at calming my nerves, to the point where, like, you would say Maya seems really calm and with it. Like, that was not the case. I could not do a 400 IM in high school without every time trying to get out of it. Like, would talk to my coach, like, I can't do it today. I can't do it today. And it took 12 years of that basically before I could get to the Olympics and be like, yeah, 400 IM, no problem. And so I think that's been really an encouraging lesson to take away, is like, there's a lot about yourself that you can improve. And if you're naturally really good at something, that's great. But, to the point on weaknesses, if you really have to change something for the purpose of what you want to be good at least in my case, I found that a lot of them are muscles, whereas people think that they are traits that you're born with. And so I take a lot of pride and kind of wonder at things that I was able to really improve and get to be, I guess, like world class at over the course of my career.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's almost like there's an element or theme under there of facing your fear and diving into it as well. Okay, awesome. This has been a blast. So let's get into the last couple of minutes here. I want to end with 9 rapid fire questions. I'm going to give you hardly any time to answer. They're going to alternate fun and deep. Okay. So this will be less than 3 minutes. Okay. So first question, what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning?
Check my phone.
What's your go-to comfort food?
Lasagna.
Nice. Can you name a book that has significantly impacted your life?
Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis.
If you could teleport to any place in the world right now, where would it be?
Hawaii.
That's so good. What's the one mental model or frame of thinking that if you didn't learn, you would likely be less happy and less fulfilled?
Honestly, growth mindset. Believe that you can get better at something, and generally you can.
What's one song that always gets you pumped up no matter what?
Super Bass by Nicki Minaj.
If you hadn't pursued swimming, what might your life look like today?
Oh, man, what a question. Probably fairly similar, but I would have less muscle mass. And I probably wouldn't be married to Rob. So
that'd be a huge bummer.
It'd be worse. Yeah.
Okay. What famous person or historical figure would you like to have lunch with if you could?
I'm a Winston Churchill fan / just interested in.
Okay. And the final question is, what is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for you?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's ever, but it's certainly memorable. But Greg Meehan, my college coach, when he first came from Cal and in our first year, he just had really high expectations for me and knew that I could achieve a lot more in my swimming career than I had, expectations for myself at the time. And kind of with that, my trajectory really changed at that point. And the next 4 years were pretty incredible. So somebody that's willing to see potential and also like be really honest and have brutally high expectations, I think is a great kindness.
Yeah, that's a beautiful one. And it's a great way to end. So Maya, thank you so much for spending the time to talk to us.
Thanks, Dave.